once again. Thanks for coming. Just want to say that we depend on Dr. Chomsky, or Professor Chomsky, to give us a story behind the story. And he, as you know, will often contradict what we see in the media. Thank God for that. And as he informs us, we can inform our community. So nothing more needs to be said by me. Please give a hand to Professor Chomsky.
Yes, please, in the Q&A, bring up anything. I mean, I've been asked to talk about Haiti, so I'll talk about that, but lots of other things. If any of you have ever flown into Haiti, you've been greeted by a rather depressing sight. Half of the island is green and the other half is brown. The Haiti side is brown. That's partially just ecology. The Dominican Republic side happens to be just the way the rains go and where the mountains are and so on. It happens to be more fertile. But most of it is man-made, like most catastrophes. And that carries right up to the present. The hideous catastrophe of the earthquake, which is one of the worst in the modern period. Hundreds of thousands of people killed, massive destruction. I'm sure you know all about it. It's to a substantial extent a man-made catastrophe. There are two countries that are primarily responsible, France and the United States. I happen to have come back from a couple of days in Paris a few days ago, and I did try repeatedly to raise the issue in France, but it's very hard to find anybody who wants to hear about it. And I hope it's a little better in the United States, but the U.S. and Haiti and France owe a tremendous debt to Haiti, and by rights should be paying massive reparations at this point, not giving aid. Probably too much to ask for, but it's a goal we ought to have in mind. And the nature of the man-made catastrophe tells us a lot about what can be and ought to be done to try to resurrect some kind of a decent life. Well, I'll run through the history briefly. I'm sure most of you know it pretty well. Haiti was France's richest colony, in fact, probably the richest colony in the world. In 1789, it produced 75% of the world's sugar. It was the leading producer of cotton. Cotton was, of course, the fuel of the Industrial Revolution. It was the leading producer of tobacco and a whole range of other valuable commodities. It's the source of probably around 20% of France's wealth, something roughly like that. At the time of the revolution, of course, took place then, and it turns out there was no discussion of the liberation of Haiti with all the grand rhetoric about revolution and equality and democracy, freedom, and so on. Nevertheless, Haiti did undertake, there was a slave revolt. The French turned into a slave society, a plantation society, that devastated the fragile ecology. France also started the process, which has now reached a horrible level, of cutting down the trees because they wanted to ship them back to France to build elegant houses and so on. That denuded the hills, leads to erosion, more devastation. By the time the French were driven out in 1804, there had already been very serious damage. The war itself, the War of Liberation, was a brutal war. France was assisted by massive help from England, the main imperial power, by the United States, by others. I mean, the idea that black people could gain freedom was really frightening to the West. But Haiti nevertheless won its freedom in 1804. It was actually the first free country of free men in the hemisphere. I stress men because women had no very few rights here or anywhere else. And it was terrifying, particularly to the slave state nearby, the United States. The idea that you could have a free black slave, former slave country was obviously frightening. Haiti was was punished severely for the crime of liberating itself and becoming the first free country. France imposed a huge indemnity, which Haiti had to pay. There was no other way they could they would be allowed to enter the international system. In fact, they didn't even pay it off until after the Second World War, and it was a yoke around their neck all through that period. The harshest punishment was, not surprisingly, from the United States. The U.S. refused to recognize Haiti. Other imperial powers did so, but not the U.S. The U.S. did finally recognize it in 1862, the same year it recognized Liberia, and for the same reason. That was the year of the Emancipation Proclamation, and there was a problem about what to do with these free black people. We didn't want them here. It was a terribly racist country, unbelievably so. It was about everyone. And they had to be shipped somewhere. So the thought was, well, maybe we can ship them off to Liberia and Haiti. Actually, that plan was dropped about 10 years later. Those of you who know African American history will remember that in the entire history of African Americans in the United States, there's been barely a few decades of a little bit of freedom. One of them was from the Civil War up till 1877, the Reconstruction period. After that, there was a compact between the North and the South, which closed the door on that period of freedom. The South was essentially given authority to reinstitute slavery. In fact, something much worse than slavery. They introduced, what was done was to criminalize black life. He looked the wrong way, or somebody claimed he looked the wrong way at a white woman, they charged with attempted rape and so on. Pretty soon you had a huge prison population, mostly black males, and they were put right back into to the cotton fields now in chain gangs. They're put into the mines, the mills. U.S. Steel had its mills there and so on. In fact, that's a large part of the American Industrial Revolution, based on black slave labor after the Civil War. Well, that went to the Second World War. The Second World War, there was a need for free labor for the military industries, huge growth of industry during the Second World War, and after that there was a growth period in the United States for about 20 years, and there were opportunities for what amounted to a new immigrant population, the black population. There were opportunities, to get a job in an auto plant and have a pretty decent salary and buy a home and so on and so forth. All of that pretty much crashed in the 1970s when new economic policies were instituted across the country, in fact, across a large part of the world, what's called neoliberalism. The economy was financialized. Industry was increasingly hollowed out, production abroad and so on. Those job opportunities disappeared. You had this black superfluous population on your hands again. And so the same solution was picked that was picked after the Second World War, criminalization. So right from this period, around 1980, the prison population in the United States starts escalating. 1980 was roughly the same as Europe, now maybe 5 to 10 times as high, and mostly black males, mostly on fraudulent drug charges. The drug war was begun at that point as an instrument for recriminalization, and we're kind of back to, and they're used for prison labor, making license plates and so on. It's a kind of a repetition of the post-slavery period. Well, going back to Haiti, the plan to ship the population out to Haiti and Liberia was sort of shelved once they became useful as a criminalized slave population here. And at that point, the United States pretty much took over from France in torturing Haiti. There were dozens of military interventions in the late 19th century and into the 20th century. The worst of them was under Woodrow Wilson. Wilson in 1915 invaded countries of Hispaniola, Haiti, and the Dominican Republic. Both invasions were pretty brutal. Worse in Haiti, the reason was racism again. In the Dominican Republic, the people were Spics. They had a mixture of white blood, so couldn't be treated too badly. But in Haiti, they were what were called inferior people, pure niggers. So you could do anything to them. And bad as it was in the Dominican Republic, it was much worse in Haiti. In Haiti, Wilson essentially reinstated virtual slavery, killed about maybe 15,000 people. The Marines went wild, all kind of torture, terror, war crimes came out of it. War crimes trials came out of it. The most significant part was, from the point of view of the future of Haiti, was to kick out the parliament. The parliament was driven out at gunpoint by the Marines, and the reason was they refused to accept what was called here progressive legislation, a new constitution written in the United States. Franklin Delano Roosevelt actually took credit for writing it, whether truly or not. The new constitution included provisions for American corporations to buy up Haitian land. And that was regarded as very progressive on good, solid economic theory. Haiti obviously needed American investment, and you couldn't expect American investors to put their money in Haiti unless they owned it. So the only way to develop Haiti was to allow American corporations to buy it up. And since the Haitians, niggers talking French, as William Jennings Bryan ridiculed them, since they didn't understand complicated ideas like this, you had to disband the parliament at gunpoint. And then the Marines did run a referendum. 5% of the population participated, and the U.S. Constitution won 99.9% of the vote, so it was all democratic. Recall, Wilson's the great exponent of democracy and freedom. The 5% who voted are the wealthy elite. There is a mulatto white elite which has devastated Haiti. It's it's all over Latin America. You have the same plague, rich societies, lots of resources, a terrible misery, mass misery, but a small sector of concentrated wealth and power, which tends to be white or mulatto, mixed white, sometimes pure white. That's all over the hemisphere. Haiti was maybe worse than anywhere. So they voted in the Constitution. They made out fine, as they usually do. This allowed the opportunity for U.S. corporations to essentially restore something like a plantation society. The effects were, as before, to drive lots of the population off the land. The U.S. left both countries, Haiti and the Dominican Republic, in the hands of brutal, vicious National Guards trained by the Marines. The benefactor of the country in the Dominican Republic was Trujillo, a great friend of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, among others, a murderous killer. But Haiti was much worse. It goes on to the Duvalier dictatorships. Finally, we get to the 1980s. Meanwhile, the same policies are being continued. In the 1980s, it got much worse again. More progressive economic theory was introduced. The World Bank and the U.S. aid devised a program to turn Haiti into what they called the Taiwan of the Caribbean, a flourishing, developed society. And the way they were going to do it was by following policies which happened to be the exact opposite of what Taiwan did. Taiwan became Taiwan because they disregarded the advice from the World Bank and the Western economists and so on, just as every developed society has done without exception, including the United States. So they disregarded it. Taiwan developed a distributed light industry throughout the country, which led to centers of economic development, which then grew and finally developed into a very advanced industrial society. In fact, most of the high technology in China comes from Taiwan and also Japan and South Korea, but primarily Taiwan. Meanwhile, Haiti stayed Haiti because they followed the advice. They had to. It was at gunpoint. So they followed the World Bank, U.S. Treasury, U.S. aid advice, which was to drive the population from the countryside even more so than before into the cities, where they could pursue their comparative advantage, which was working in assembly plants, U.S.-owned assembly plants, stitching baseballs, making textiles, horrifying conditions, mostly women. The countryside was again largely emptied. The provisions required that Haiti cut back its expenditures for education and for social services and for public infrastructure, because economic theory explains that that's a waste. You have to devote resources to export-oriented production. They can't produce their own rice because U.S. subsidized rice is much better. The Haitian rural economy is largely based on pigs, but USAID decided that their pigs were no good. They had to kill off all the pigs, 100% of them. That's a substantial basis for the peasant society, even culturally. They were a means of exchange and so on. And they introduced Iowa pigs, sophisticated pigs. To take care of an Iowa pig requires more money than a Haitian peasant can make in 10 years. So the Iowa pigs died off and the Haitian pigs were gone. And other progressive measures like that were undertaken, in fact imposed at gunpoint. There were also political developments in 1986, I guess it was. There was actually an election, and Baby Doc, the second of the Duvaliers, won the election with 99.98% of the vote. It was almost as good as Wilson's election, not quite. Wilson had 99.9%. The Reagan administration was very enthusiastic. It spoke of democratic developments in Haiti, so therefore we have to give the military junta more military aid and so on. Well, this went on right through the 80s. Again, driving people off the land into the cities, laying the basis for the catastrophes that we see. This had been going on since the French. In 1990, Haitians committed a major crime which required serious punishment. There was a free election, and they voted the wrong way. And you don't do that. If you want to know what happens when you do that, ask the people in Gaza. Voting the wrong way in a free election is a major crime. And there's a solution for it. You have to punish the population. In Haiti, nobody was paying any attention in Haiti to what was happening in the hills and in the slums. But in fact, there was a lot of grassroots organizing going on. And to everybody's amazement, they actually won the election with 2/3 of the vote, voting in a populist priest, Jean-Bertrand Aristide. The Americans had a candidate, Marc Bazin, a World Bank official. He got 14% of the vote. The U.S. immediately turned to shifting its aid to Haiti to the opposition, to the business-led opposition, the white mulatto business-led opposition, to try to lay the basis for overthrowing the government. And what made the crime even worse was that Aristide's policies were successful, in fact recognized as successful by the IMF and the Inter-American Development Bank and others, who praised his steps towards reducing the stifling bureaucracy, towards putting the social spending which was required and so on. And it really looked for a little while as if Haiti might only might not only become free and democratic, which is bad enough, but it might fall out of U.S. hands, which is even worse. Well, the expected military coup took place 7 months after Aristide's election. The Organization of American States imposed an embargo. The U.S. technically joined the embargo, but within about a few weeks, George Bush, #1, he was president then, he modified the terms of the embargo. He carried out something that the New York Times praised as fine-tuning the embargo for the benefit of the Haitian people. The fine-tuning was to allow U.S. corporations to violate the embargo. Great for the Haitian people, but it's a usual kind of progressive action that's taken, praised. So the embargo was undermined right away. The trade with Haiti increased, in fact. The members of the elite who were, the rich elite who were closely involved with the military junta, they were freely shopping in Miami, enjoying themselves, making a lot of money. Technically, the Bush and then later Clinton issued a directive, presidential directive, blocking oil shipments to the military junta. I happened to be there at the time in 1993. It was a horrible terror, hideous terror, thousands of people killed, murders. I was there right in the middle of it. And I mean, you could see the oil farms being built in Port-au-Prince, but the CIA was reporting to Congress that all oil shipments had been stopped thanks to the presidential directive. It was later learned that Bush and particularly Clinton secretly permitted Texaco Oil Company to send oil in violation of the presidential directive. This discovery was so prominent that you couldn't miss it. It was the lead story on AP the day before the Marine invasion, when everyone had their eyes glued to AP, and the press managed to suppress it. It was reported in the Wall Street Journal and a couple of industry journals, a couple of minor papers here and there, but almost nobody knows about it. That's Clinton. Actually, under Clinton, trade with Haiti increased even beyond Bush. The terror increased. Finally, in 1994, Clinton apparently decided that the Haitians had been tortured enough. He sent in the Marines, mainly to protect the junta and the wealthy, and allowed the president to return, the elected president to return, but on very harsh conditions. The conditions for Aristide's return were that he accept the electoral program of the defeated candidate in the 1990 election. Very harsh neoliberal program. So, for example, no import restrictions and no subsidies for development and so on. Well, the consequences of that are pretty obvious, and they were understood immediately. So USAID came out right away with a report saying that the effect of this will be to destroy what's left of Haitian agriculture, for good reasons. Haitian rice farmers are quite efficient, but they can't possibly compete with U.S. agribusiness, which is getting maybe 40% of its income from U.S. subsidies, government subsidies. So of course it'll wipe it out. And that's considered a good thing, because remember, their comparative advantage is not producing rice. It's better for economic reasons for them to import highly subsidized U.S. rice. They're supposed to go back to assembly plants. So that was very progressive. And it did destroy Haitian rice farming, staple of the food economy. So the country had been self-sufficient. Now it imports almost everything. There were small businesses, a few small businesses that somehow managed to survive, but they couldn't survive these policies either. So, for example, one small business that was working in Haiti was producing chicken parts. They do raise chickens, and the factory was making chicken parts. Well, it turns out Americans don't like dark meat. So there's an excess of dark meat in the corporations like Tyson and the other big ones, and they don't know what to do with it. So they tried to dump it. Well, they tried to dump it in Mexico and Canada, but they have functioning governments, so they could use anti-dumping laws and prevent it. But Haiti, thanks to Clinton, is not permitted to block meat that's dumped from Tyson and others. So that poured in, and that wiped out this little industry. And that's the picture across the board. I mean, to Clinton's credit, a couple of weeks ago, he did make an apology, sort of. He said he didn't understand that when he imposed these conditions, that it would, he said the conditions he imposed were very good for Arkansas rice producers. Didn't mention the chicken industries. They were very good for Arkansas rice producers, but they did wipe out Haitian rice production. He couldn't figure that out at the time. He couldn't read the USAID report or so on and so forth. But he did apologize, which is very rare. I mean, I have to say that's almost unique case in history. Try to find something like it. But it was clear that that was going to happen. It did happen. It just helped destroy what was left of the country. In 2000, Aristide, there was an election. Aristide was elected again handily. The U.S. at that point, this is now Bush II, blocked any aid to Haiti on spurious grounds. They also blocked international aid, so aid from the Inter-American Development Bank and so on was all blocked. Haiti had to continue paying interest on the aid that it wasn't receiving, that it was not allowed to get the aid. So of course that's another horrible blow to the country. Meanwhile, there are one after another disasters taking place. I mean, a tropical storm goes through the region. It'll kill thousands of people in Haiti, maybe 2 people in Cuba, same storm, but different societies. Any minor event in Haiti is going to be magnified because of the destruction that's been imposed on the population. In 2008, there were food prices rose very sharply over the world, and there were food riots all over the place. The first ones were in Haiti because their food supply has been destroyed. You know, people are starving. In 2004, the traditional torturers of Haiti, France and the United States, helped by Canada, swept in, kidnapped the president, sent him off to Central Africa, and reimposed their own military regime, led to another wave of terror. The U.S. has been trying to keep Aristide out of the hemisphere. 1 or 2 countries haven't agreed, but they're certainly not going to let him back into Haiti. And then we're up to today. When the earthquake came along a couple of months ago in January, it was a serious earthquake. But, for example, there was a much more serious earthquake in Chile a couple of weeks later, and that one killed a couple hundred people. This one killed maybe 250,000 people and devastated the society. And it's a man-made catastrophe to a large extent. Aristide did politely approach France a couple of years ago and request that maybe it's time to give them a little help to overcome the effect of this horrifying indemnity that they imposed. France did establish a committee, a government committee, led by Regis Debray, old leftist. They determined that there was no merit in the request, so that was dismissed. And we're now up to now. I mean, there is a fair amount quite a lot of money coming in. The question is what should be done with it. My opinion is it shouldn't be called aid. It should be a fraction of the reparations that are required by any honest standards. And it should go, I think, to the popular organizations. Despite all of the hideous destruction that's taken place in Haiti over many years, it still retains a lively, functioning civil society, the ones who swept Aristide into office in 1990 in unbelievable poverty. Unless you've been there, you just can't fathom it. I've been in a lot of awful places, but nothing like that. But still, it goes on. You know, they're functioning, they're lively, they have ideas, and they're the ones who ought to be taking responsibility for and giving an opportunity to try to rebuild something from this wreckage of centuries of imperial destruction. But whether that happens or not, or how it happens, is basically up to people like you. So I'll stop there.
I want to set up the Q&A for you. Okay, over here. Dr. Chomsky will take your questions. I also want to mention that we have his latest book, Hopes and Prospects, for sale down in our visitor center.
I would like to ask you if you could comment a bit on the role of the United Nations in Haiti, if you will, if it has been something that's been in line with the World Bank and the IMF approach, or it's been separate, and if you could talk about the UN's role in the world per se as an institution. Is it doing more damage, or do you make a difference between UN agencies like UNICEF and all versus like broadly the UN?
UN agencies in Haiti?
In Haiti, if you could comment on that, and also on the world. I worked briefly with the UN. I'm trying to figure out how to get out of it and trying to...
You were involved with UN agencies?
Yeah, and I just like to get my moral compass right with you.
By and large, I mean, you know, if you've worked with the UN, you know what it's like. It's a very cumbersome bureaucracy with a lot of corruption, and it's pretty awful. But by and large, they do about as well as they can under those conditions. The constraints on the UN are the great powers, mainly the US, of course, the most important power. In the case of Haiti, the UN did complain publicly that, as did other aid agencies, that they weren't able to introduce aid because when the US, when Obama sent in, you know, the immediate reaction of the United States was to send in a huge military contingent, which took over the airport. And the aid agencies, including the UN, claimed that aid shipments were blocked while soldiers were being shipped in and so on. But as far as I know, they've done a fairly decent job. I mean, the question is where the aid is going to and what form it'll take. Will it take a form that allows the people of Haiti to, the popular organized sectors of Haitian society, to work out ways to try to reconstruct their own country? And there are a lot of things that have to be done. I mean, not just economic development, also cultural change. So, for example, everyone in Haiti speaks Creole. A small sector, mostly wealthy, speak French. The official language is French. The language of the schools is French. If you speak Creole, like you're 95% of the population, you barely know French, you're kind of a second-class citizen. There's no reason for that to stay. The educational program ought to be revamped so that they can use their own language. And it should become, you know, the language of the society, not French as a residue from the days of French imperialism. And it's the language of the rich, of course. But that's secondary to the problems of economic development, which are really extraordinary. I mean, for one thing, the countryside has to be rebuilt. Society can't survive with a huge mass of people crammed into slums in Port-au-Prince. So that means it means the kind of development that actually did take place in Taiwan. You know, distributing development to different parts of the country with state-organized subsidies, industrial policy designed to carry out balanced, sustainable development that can succeed, as it did in Taiwan, for example. Our own country's an example itself. I mean, when the United States won its freedom in 1786, there was advice from the leading economists of the day. Adam Smith, in particular, advised the United States on what it should do to grow and develop. His advice was pretty much what economists give the so-called developing world today. That the United States, he said, should concentrate on its comparative advantage. They didn't use the term then, but that's what it was, the things we're good at. We should be exporting fish and fur and primary agricultural products. And we should be importing industrial goods from England, where they were much more advanced. Instead of trying to develop an industrial society here, that would violate all the laws of economics, and it would be much better for if the United States followed those policies. And pretty much the same advice that the Treasury Department, the World Bank, the economics profession, and so on gives to the Third World today. Smith also urged that the United States not try to institute a monopoly over the primary products that it produces, because you can prove in economic theory and so on that that's bad for the world economy. Well, the U.S. was a sovereign country, and it could therefore follow its own policies. So it rejected all of those policies, 100%. Alexander Hamilton, who sort of created the U.S. economy, immediately imposed very high import duties to block superior British textiles and other manufacturers. And that enabled the United States to develop, at first, a textile industry. It goes on, and later a steel industry. Actually, the U.S. had the highest protection in the world, and also the highest growth rate. And the correlation is not accidental. As far as monopolies are concerned, the U.S. tried very hard to gain a monopoly of cotton. Cotton was it's like oil today. It was the fuel of the Industrial Revolution. And the U.S. was producing a lot of it, but not all. The U.S. conquered Texas and half of Mexico. And as you know, and a prime goal was to try to gain a monopoly of cotton production. And U.S. presidents like Tyler argued that if we can control cotton production, we can bring England to its feet. England was the great enemy then. Remember, that was the powerful military force. And they were a deterrent. The U.S. couldn't conquer Canada, couldn't conquer Cuba because of British military force. But if we could monopolize cotton, we could bring England to its feet, and then we could expand and so on. So the U.S. tried very hard to monopolize cotton and succeeded pretty well. Actually, Adam Smith's prediction, which, to repeat, is pretty much the same as the instructions given to the Third World today, were based on solid economic theory, and it's probably the most spectacularly refuted prediction in history. But that's the way countries grow and develop. If you can find an exception, well, try. I mean, it's not, it's pretty striking that the one country of the South, outside of Europe and the United States, the one country that developed, Japan, is the one country that wasn't colonized. And it also could therefore violate the injunctions of the leaders of economic thought and of the wealthy powers. Well, Haiti didn't have that, hasn't had that luck. But unless it has the capacity to truly gain sovereignty and have the capacity to run its own, to carry out a form of development that's appropriate for the society, the way Taiwan did and South Korea and others, then it's not going to have much of a future. It'll be a colonial dependency, as it has been. But that's really, they can't do it on their own. That's something we have to do.
I was in Haiti about a month ago, and clearly the aid is not getting to the people. It's not getting to where it is supposed to go with all of the NGOs that are in Haiti, more so than any other country. We managed to get on the compound of the International Red Cross, 33 nation states, and the lack of luxury that they enjoy, even down to an Italian restaurant. And that's just juxtaposed to the way the Haitians are living in these tent cities and neighborhoods, the difference is more than striking. However, my question is about the popular resistance that we're beginning to see that have emerged on the streets. It really started before the earthquake at the university. A leading university professor was murdered. And so something has been brewing on the streets for a long time. So I wonder if you could give us your sense of what's happening with this popular resistance. It seems to be very definitely tied into a very structural, organized way with the leadership in the tent city neighborhoods that are very structured and very impressive with the people whom I spoke to. And what are your thoughts about that? And where might this lead to in terms of challenging this structural adjustment and developing program clearly of Canada, the U.S., and France that has nothing to do with the needs of the Haitian people?
Yeah, what you describe is unfortunately pretty common. When the NGOs, a lot of the NGOs are quite good. You know, some of them do really good work. But there's a kind of an NGO culture which is really like vultures. I mean, they wait till a catastrophe comes somewhere, and then they flood in and pick up the money that's being poured in from, you know, the wealthy countries, and they live just like you described. I mean, they go to the fancy restaurants. You know, they live at a salary. They live at a level way above the population, which causes all sorts of problems, and it diverts aid away from where it ought to go into the hands of the Western-run NGOs. And I'm not surprised to hear that something like that's happening in Haiti. I mean, there are constructive things that could be done. The main one is what you say. I mean, there has been, for a long time, it's kind of amazing, but there have been a very lively, active, engaged public, local organizations, activist organizations. The most striking case of it was just Aristide's election. And then the repeated election, every time there's an election, the same thing happens. And they're there, and we have to figure out ways to get the aid into their hands for them to run. There may be joint projects in which they take over. Actually, the most effective NGO in Haiti that I know of, and it really has been good, works just like that. That's Paul Farmer's Partners in Health programs. They set up, back in the mid-'80s, a clinic in one of the poorest areas of rural Haiti, and Paul and others who worked there made sure that Haitians took it over. So it's now pretty much run by Haitian paramedics, Haitian doctors and others. If they need some kind of sophisticated surgery, the doctor will fly down from Boston or something. But it's pretty much run by Haitians, and very effective. Right through the earthquake, it was there were people pouring in from all over, way beyond anything they could handle, and that's the way to do it. You know, to develop institutions that are taken over by the local population and run by them in their own way, and they can do things that the outsiders can't do. So if you want to say have maternal aid for a woman in a rural village off in the hills somewhere, I mean, a Haitian paramedic can do it, but Western doctors can't. And it's pretty much the same in every area. Actually, there are other things that could be done on a national level. So one proposal, which came from the Center for Economic and Policy Research, very good economic research institute, is that the United States should buy up the entire Haitian rice crop at a decent price, above the market price. Well, that would be a tremendous subsidy to Haitian rice farmers. It would enable them to, it would also mean, and of course it means buy it up and give it to the Haitian people. It would have a major effect on the serious malnutrition. It would give a shot in the arm to domestic production. And of course, the other thing that ought to be done, not just for Haiti, but for the whole world, is for the Western countries, the United States and Europe, to put an end to the agricultural subsidies, which are destroying agriculture all over the world. poor countries can't compete with highly subsidized Western agribusiness. Europe is even worse than the United States in this respect, and that ought to be totally gone. Haiti's debt ought to be completely eliminated. It's totally, it's called odious debt, has no legitimacy. And there are other steps that can be taken at a general policy-making level, but the main one is the one you talk about. Aid should go to the local functioning organizations, whether it's educational assistance, technical projects, agricultural development, community development, whatever it may be. And that's going to take a lot of pressure from the population here. And it should happen in France. As far as I know, nothing's going on in France, but it should.
The characterization of Aristide requesting help from France. I think one of the major reasons why there was this vindictive element was because he was quite strident, although eloquent, in that he was not requesting aid. He was actually discussing how they would not reach a level of basic moral development without accepting the fact that their wealth was based upon their poverty, and that they should provide to Haiti what is rightfully Haiti's. So I think that was one element.
Well, yeah, I read the same things you did, and it could be looked at that way, but I regarded that as polite. I mean, I thought it was right.
But I guess the emphasis on reparations for historical injustice versus aid is something that plays a factor in that.
Yeah, it's true, but he should, I mean, I thought it should even been stronger, but I thought it was a fair statement. Yeah. He should, I mean, France destroyed the country. France enriched itself by destroying the country. They imposed a burden on the country that prevented it from developing ever since its liberation, for the crime of liberation. Under those conditions, it seems to me pretty fair to ask for reparations.
Yeah, sure. I wanted to ask you, because of the work that you've done on intellectual culture and the media and that realm of policy, what is it that allows people like Clinton to go in front of the Congressional Committee and say things like, I'm going to have to live with this regret for the rest of my life every day? And also, another example is Jeffrey Sachs, who you've condemned in the harshest words for his work in Bolivia and in the Eastern Bloc, who became a quite vigorous and a pretty a fair advocate for Haiti during the time where the rest of the intellectual culture was demonizing it. So I wanted to ask you, what about those particular aspects? How does that relate to this doctrinal system that you discuss?
The fact that occasionally somebody does a decent thing doesn't tell you the doctrinal system isn't there. I mean, Clinton's statement was good. I'm glad he made it. As I think I mentioned, it's practically unique in imperial history. Try to find something like it. It was nowhere near what he should have said. I mean, it was just like a fraction of what he should have said. But it's good that he said it. There was a little commentary about it. If you do a media search, you won't find much. And I didn't see any commentary explaining what it meant and what the background was. In the case of Jeff Sachs, he's, he continues, he certainly has shifted his position very substantially from the time that he was calling for shock therapy in Russia, which led to utter catastrophe, practically destroyed the economy, harsh neoliberal programs in Bolivia, which had a horrible effect. And yeah, he's revised his positions and is doing good things, so praise him for it.
What lessons do you see Fanmi Lavalas and that 2 decades rather, of popular participation, what are the lessons that we can apply from that to the United States? What are the different scenarios and impediments that the United States has that perhaps are unique, that prevent us from creating a popular-based movement like Fanmi Lavalas? Thank you.
That's an important question. I mean, it's quite striking that we and other Western countries can't can't even approach, can't even dream about the level of democracy that they had in Haiti. I mean, that's pretty shocking. Now, here's one of the poorest countries in the world. We're talking the population that did organize to win that election are among the most repressed and impoverished in the world, and they managed to organize to enough to enter the electoral arena without any resources and to elect their own candidate. I mean, is it believable that we can't do the same? You know, it's not the only case. I mean, the same thing happened in Bolivia a couple of years ago. I mean, the indigenous population, which is, you know, the most repressed in the continent, over some years, this is overcoming the effects of the policies that Jeff Sachs had helped impose. They began to take their fate into their own hands. It began well before the election. The election was in 2005, but in 2000 there were what were called the water wars in Bolivia. The World Bank and huge international corporations, Bechtel here, one from France, were trying to privatize water. And again, you know, in an economic seminar, you can prove a theorem that says it's more efficient to privatize water. Footnote: most people can't afford it, so they don't drink. But you know, can't have everything perfect. So they tried to privatize water. The mostly Indian population rejected it. They demonstrated, they protested, it became pretty violent. A lot of them were killed by the security forces. But they finally succeeded in tossing out the international corporations and the World Bank. That was done with international solidarity. That's also important. They carried the main action that they were carrying out in Cochabamba happened to be at the same time that there were protests here at the World Bank and in Washington, and they were coordinated. So thanks to the internet, they could be coordinated. There were also protests around the world at the home offices of the main corporations, and that combination of international solidarity and protest on the ground won a big victory. And then they went on from there. They went on to other issues, and finally they reached the point where they could enter the electoral arena, the majority of the population, and they won an election. In 2005, they elected someone from their own ranks, poor peasant. The issues were very real. Everybody knew what they were. Control over resources, problems of justice. It's a very multi-ethnic society, so complex questions of cultural rights. And the election was, they were well organized for the election, won it, elected their own person, someone from their own ranks, in fact. But that was just a moment in ongoing struggles. Then they go back and continue the other struggles. Well, you know, that's functioning democracy. It's beyond anything we can conceive of here. It's, and that's a problem about the United States and Europe, you know, and the other wealthy industrial countries. The concept of democracy has just been so impoverished that we have to go to the poorest countries in the world to see what democracy means. And yeah, we can take lessons from that, lessons that we should apply. I mean, anything they've done, we can do 1,000 times more easily. So fine, let's do it. You know. To do it, you have to first know about it and draw the lessons.
Your response to the situation in Gaza now and the similarity between the suffering of the Palestinian people and the Haitian people, and both of them victims of racism.
There are similarities. I mentioned one. The Haitians and the Palestinians were both punished severely for the crime of voting the wrong way. I mean, the harsh punishment of Gaza has been miserably treated for a long time, but it really escalated in January 2006, and the reason was very straightforward. You could read it on the front page of the New York Times. In fact, you could read adjacent columns on the front page of the New York Times, one of which praised the United States for its dedication to democracy and all wonderful things. And the one right next to it by Stephen Engelberg said that it was the day after, a couple of days after the election, that the U.S. and Israel are going to impose harsh sanctions on Palestinians for voting the wrong way, and the only free elections only taking place in the Arab world. And as far as I can see, that didn't elicit a whisper of protest, even comment. Yeah, sure, okay, people vote the wrong way, I got to punish them. In Gaza, the punishment was severe. The siege was imposed. It went to the extent that Israel even blocked water from the arid Gaza Strip. In the months that followed, the violence increased. In fact, by June, Israel had fired 7,700 rockets into the Strip, and there was incursions and killings and so on. Without going through the whole history, the punishment picked up much more harshly a year later, in June 2007. What happened then is that the U.S. and Israel and the Palestinian Authority tried to carry out a military coup in Gaza to overthrow the elected government and to institute the rule of a Fatah strongman, Mohammed Dahlan. Well, the coup was beaten back, and Hamas took over, and that's when the punishment really became savage. And this incident is described here as proof of, Hamas terrorism. How could they dare not accept a U.S.-run military coup that was designed to overthrow the elected government? And it just goes on from there. By now, it's not the worst crime in the world, but it's surely one of the most savage. I mean, Israel's keeping the population as kind of caged animals. They're not letting them all die because that would cause too much of an international uproar, but they're barely permitting them to survive. I mean, you take a look at the restrictions on goods that can go in. I mean, it's shocking, pencils, medicines, almost anything you can think of. Anything beyond bare survival is blocked. Egypt cooperates, although the last couple of days it's backed off. The United States, of course, cooperates. Israel is also regularly attacking Gaza. One thing, it just goes in and kills people if it feels like, but it's also trying to drive people away from the borders. That's fertile land, so drive them away from the borders with constant attacks, gunfire, and so on. It's also been driving them away from from their territorial waters. So Israeli gunships over the past 10 years have been driving fishermen closer and closer to the shore. By now, they can't go out more than a few miles from the shore, which kills the fishing industry, and for one reason, because the sewage and power plants have been destroyed by the Israeli attacks. So everything near the shore, it's so totally polluted you can't fish. Maybe it's coincidence, maybe it isn't, but these attacks on Gaza fishermen, which all of this is of course criminal. I mean, there's no point even talking. I mean, it happens to be in violation of Security Council Resolution 1860, which called for an end to the siege. But the idea of talking about law when you bring up something that the United States and Israel are doing is like a bad joke. So yes, it's illegal, known to be illegal, but in fact that Security Council resolution passed 14-0 with one abstention. You can guess who the abstention was. That means it's inapplicable. But so of course it's criminal. To get back to the sea, in 1999, the British Gas, major British gas company, discovered apparently substantial reserves of natural gas off the coast of Gaza, in fact all along the eastern Mediterranean, but particularly in the territorial waters of Gaza. Well, Israel, of course, wants the gas. And right at that point, they started driving fishing boats out of their own territorial waters towards land. And in fact, Israel has been negotiating with British Gas to contracting to get the oil that's extracted from Gazan territorial waters. Well, there was a little, I and a couple of other people tried to initiate some inquiries and protests about that. There could be a court case about it in Britain, but there's a hang-up, it turns out, which terminated the inquiries. Palestinian authorities involved. They're covering for it. And once you reach that barrier, the inquiries can't go on. There's a lot of ugly things there, but back to your point, it's the punishment of Gaza really took off after they voted the wrong way in a free election, very similar to Haiti in that respect. It's not the only case. And it's pretty ugly. I mean, the current example, the flotilla, which you all read about, that's multiply criminal. For one thing, attacking ships in international waters is, of course, a crime. It's a violation of every principle of maritime law. Killing people when you do it is even a worse crime. Here, it's accepted. So if you look at the commentary here, say the New York Times, it's run a couple of op-eds on it. Almost every one is from an Israeli government official or some sympathizer. I mean, I happened to be listening to NPR, the liberal voice, a couple of days ago. I torture myself with that every once in a while. So they have two commentators from what's called the left and the right who comment on the week's events, David Brooks and E.J. DeYoung, and I happened to catch that segment. They were asked what they thought about the attack on the flotilla, and they were kind of competing with one another to see who could be more vociferous in supporting it. I mean, that's the realm of discussion in the United States. I should say I think the U.S. is off the international spectrum on this. I haven't seen anything like that in any other country. But here it's almost uniform support for it, in articulate opinion at least, which is not surprising because the U.S. is doing it. So, of course, there's total support in the articulate classes. Furthermore, it's worth bearing in mind that Israel has been doing this for about 30 years. For decades, they've been attacking ships in international waters from Cyprus to Lebanon and capturing them, killing people, kidnapping them. Often they've kidnapped people and put them into secret Israeli prisons. They have a big kind of gulag of their own, and holding them as hostages, openly, keeping them as hostages. And of course the U.S. pats them on the back so they can keep doing it. Well, this is another case. This one happened to elicit some international attention. Now, Israel's justification for it is that they have to protect themselves from rocket fire from Gaza. Well, putting aside any question about do you have to kill people and stop ships at sea to block that, the whole thing is a total farce. You can't discuss this in the United States, but the facts are very clear. Israel knows precisely how to stop rockets. Precisely. The U.S. knows too. They can accept Hamas's offer to reinstitute a truce. There was a truce instituted in June 2008. Israel agreed to a truce. They said they'd open the borders, and they partially did, but not completely. And in return, Hamas said that it would stop all rocket firing, and it did. You can read that on the Israeli government webpage. Mark Regev, the Israeli government spokesman, who's on television all the time giving apologetics, he said publicly, of course, on British television where he was asked, he said he agreed, all rocket firing had stopped. So you want to stop rocket firing? Agree to the truce. Well, that went on, that was June 2008, went on until November of 2008. In November, Israel invaded the Gaza Strip, killed half a dozen Hamas activists, then rocket fire started, both directions. Everyone who was killed was Palestinian, of course. Hamas offered to reinstitute the truce, The Israeli cabinet considered the offer. We know this from Israeli sources. They considered the offer and rejected it because they wanted to use violence. And then comes Operation Cast Lead to invade Gaza on the pretext that they have to stop the rocket firing. Now, there's a lot of debate about was the attack on Gaza disproportionate and so on. It's all beside the point. You cannot use force in self-defense unless you've exhausted peaceful means. And in this case, they refuse even to try peaceful means. Presumably because the U.S. and Israel has every reason to believe they'd work, and then you wouldn't be able to use force. But all the discussion about this is kind of like off the wall. It's in some other universe. And that's approximately 100%. And it's about the same in Europe, I'm sorry to say, which tails along behind the United States on this. And the same is true about the flotilla. There is no justification whatsoever on grounds of self-defense, since they have peaceful means to defend themselves, except the ceasefire. Okay, so the whole thing is completely without any justification.
We live in a mentally challenged world because of the media that you've so well described over the years, making it impossible to sort things out very clearly. And our groups here, we function in a kind of like a huge umbrella of progressive groups that are trying, whether it's Haiti or Palestine, to make the people suffer a little bit less. That seems to be maximum goal. Just not to really be able to possibly change anything, but just maybe a little less suffering. This recent incident with Helen Thomas saying something which is outrageous for everyone to hear. The fact that she says, these people were settlers, they came from Poland, and God bless them, the Holocaust. But the Holocaust was a white colonialist world phenomenon. It was, and for the complicity that the white world, which was the top world, felt for this, they gave this partition of British protectorate Palestine this kind of a deal. And the major mankind, which is made up of non-white people, they've never bought that idea. Is it beneficial to go back into history like we did? So. And how could we do more than just progressives trying to make people hurt a little bit less?
There's a lot of things we can do. We can't go out and start organizing steel workers because we don't work in steel plants. Okay, so you can do work where you are. You can't do work where you aren't. Well, a lot of us live in, educated, some academic, some professional communities, and there's a lot that can be done there. One of the things that can be done is to compel ourselves to recognize history. If you give up history, you've lost the basis for doing lots of important things. I mean, Haiti's a perfect example. If we could get to the point of recognizing the history, we could see the kinds of things that we ought to do and we're capable of doing. And that's across the board. I mean, you mentioned the Holocaust, maybe the most hideous destruction in history. But it's not the only case of mass genocide. I mean, let's take us right here. We live here because the indigenous population was exterminated. That's the word that was used by the founding fathers. They were that hapless race of North Americans that were exterminated by the most perfidious cruelty. That's us, Do we accept it? Well, you can read the New York Review of Books, for example, the left liberal, the most important left liberal intellectual journal in the world, and you can read an article there about a year ago which says that by a good, decent, leftish commentator, which says that when Columbus arrived in the Western Hemisphere, he found an empty continent with maybe 1 million people wandering around, the kind of hunter-gatherers, couldn't, so there was basically no one here. Well, he's off by maybe 100 million. And they had advanced societies, pretty much like the Europeans, except in the means of destruction. There wasn't, I waited to see, there was not one single letter that appeared to say, wait a minute, you're off by 100 million, and it was mass genocide, Well, okay, if the history can be erased to that extent, we're not going to be able to face the problems that exist. I just came down this morning on a train from Boston, and I happened to be reading a journal, Diplomatic History. That's, of all the international scholarly journals on international affairs, that's the one that's most open, that has most critical and so on. Right, this issue happened to be devoted to the Vietnam War. So I read through the issue, and some interesting work on it here and there, a lot of scholarship, plenty of footnotes. There's just one thing missing. There is not one word saying that there might have been something wrong about invading another country, killing 4 million people, destroying a couple other countries on the side. The closest it came to that was saying, well, maybe it was a mistake. Okay, if that's recent history, which many of us were involved in, but history has been reappropriated by the conquerors, by the imperial culture, and prettified so that we're protected from it. Well, if we allow our own communities to protect themselves from the actual history, there isn't going to be much in the way of constructive actions. So yeah, I think history is important. And it's a battleground. It shouldn't be conceded.
About 10,000 people were at a demonstration, and they began to burn these seeds that Monsanto is forcing on them, which are you remember these kind of seeds that they don't reproduce, they're genetically modified, they can blow over into the DR. So this is a horror show. The peasant movements to look toward food sovereignty and reconstructing the agriculture in Haiti.
You're absolutely right. I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, it's Monsanto, but the U.S. government is behind it, which means we can do a lot about it. And what it is just as you say, it's a way of ensuring that Haitian farmers are captive. These seeds do not reproduce. I mean, apart from the fact that they may, spread around, destroy other things, the farmers themselves cannot use the seeds the next season. They have to go back to Monsanto to purchase the seeds and purchase the fancy fertilizers and so on. So it's kind of like destroying the pigs. It's another way of capturing the agricultural population, making sure they can't reconstitute a decent life. And it's being done by advanced technology, your taxes, my taxes, and so on. And the idea of organizing to send them real seeds, that's really important. And that's something very constructive that can be done. But also there's an educational aspect to it, as you pointed out. So very glad you brought that up.
You spoke about Paul Farmer. I'm very interested in how you see the things playing out politically with this commission co-chaired by Clinton, who you're very critical of. Paul Farmer, in a way, made the step to be formal part of this by being the right hand of Clinton.
So what about his participation in the commission with Clinton and others?
Yeah, well, I was wondering, I mean, this seems such an odd couple, and at the same time, so much is riding on this, right? I mean, we have a government that's not really functional. We have the Clintons who have been promoting plans that probably most of us don't like, sweatshops and this kind of thing. And then we have Paul Farmer there popping up, who is taking the lead, talking to NGOs and so on. And I'm trying to find out which direction is this going. Is Clinton going to listen to Paul Farmer? Is Paul Farmer really influential? Did he make the wrong step to be part of this political forum? Please.
I'm sure he's cutting corners, but You know, I personally trust him. I think he's probably making the right decisions. I don't know exactly what's going on in that commission. It's secret, you know. But you can see that there must be internal conflicts. I mean, he knows perfectly well what Clinton's record was. And he's decided, I suspect for good reasons, that it's the best of bad alternatives now is to cooperate with it and see if it can be moved into a healthier direction for the people of Haiti. And I think he has good judgment. And so without knowing the details, I kind of assume that what he's doing is the right thing.
Very good. And do you see the Haitian government really playing a role in this reconstruction? Do you see the Haitian government?
Haitian
government
barely exists, you know, unfortunately, you know. I mean, first it's got to exist, you know, then.
Thank you so much, and I also have sort of another question that might seem sort of vague and abstract, and I think you've somewhat addressed it, but in what would you say that pragmatic solidarity, going back to Paul Farmer, really consists? I mean, kind of on a daily basis, he writes that when we regard the perpetrators of structural violence from a comfortable reserve, we automatically
Sorry, but I'm not hearing very well.
I'm sorry. So going back to Paul Farmer, I wanted to ask what you would say pragmatic solidarity consists in.
I mean, in general about solidarity work?
Yeah, I mean, what would you say it consists in on a daily basis, I guess, pragmatically speaking?
I kind of don't think there's a lot that can be said at a sort of an abstract level. You got to go to the particular cases. And so take, say, the case of Monsanto seeds. Okay, here's a case where solidarity work can do something very constructive. For one thing, it can spread understanding among the population about what this means. It's not a charitable gift from Monsanto and the United States. It's a way to ensure that Haitian farmers remain captives. And second, you can do something to counter it, like the program of organizing seeds. And the same in case after case. You just can't say anything general. You have to work through the cases and figure out what's the way to interact with suffering people so as to help them, not to help NGOs, as somebody pointed out. It's, at least I don't know how to make a general comment on it.
Yeah,
it really just depends on the particular case. And each case has to be thought about because they all have consequences.
And bringing pressure to bear on elected officials and things like that. I mean, how much, I mean, I guess organizing and protesting is one thing, but... One-day
protest and so on. What about a protest?
I mean, organizing and protesting is one thing, but how effective do you think that is?
Well, you know, a protest makes sense if it's part of an ongoing activity. A protest which is just of the kind that, unfortunately, we have too many of. I'm going out and protest, and then I'll go back home and go back to my ordinary life. Exactly. That's a kind of a feel-good protest. But the kind of protest that took place, say, in Cochabamba about the privatization of water, that's a real protest. Because, yes, they did have demonstration that day, but then the next day they went on and did something else. So if protests are part of, you know, an active, ongoing engagement, yeah, it can be very valuable. So like take, say, the anti-war protests in the late 60s. They were events, at least for the serious people. They were single events which just brought people together, mobilized them, you know, made themselves visible as part of the day-to-day activities that they were engaged in, educational, activists, and so on. And that's what protests ought to be. Otherwise, it's kind of like, I'll feel good, I'll see my friends, you know.
Regarding Taiwan, Japan, and South Korea, can it not be said that the United States gave them a great deal of slack because of the dire communist threat owing to the Chinese Revolution and the Korean War? And I suppose that could also be said of Germany and Western Europe. I mention this because the U.S. allowed import and other controls in some light industry in the Philippines under President Quirino in the late 1940s because of the communist hoopla threat at the time.
You're talking about Taiwan.
And then...
You're talking about Taiwan.
Right,
yeah.
But I'm contrasting
Yeah.
And then in the Philippines, then they forced full control under President Macapagal in 1960, once the communist threat was crushed. Now, however, in Iraq, Afghanistan, Egypt, and Jordan, the favored method to counter the Islamic threat seems to be massive bribery.
Yeah. Look, I'm not suggesting that Taiwan, South Korea, Japan, and so on are lovely models to follow. In fact, you're right. I mean, the United States gave them a certain slack to violate the rules for geopolitical reasons. But the point that I was making is a different one. They developed by following basically the same principles that the United States and other developed societies applied, and by violating the rules that are imposed on the weak. They didn't do it in a pretty way, by any means. Like South Korea was a terrible dictatorship, which the U.S. backed. But that's how they developed. And countries that do not have sovereignty, do not control their own economic life, and cannot enter the market, and do not have the capacity to enter the market on their own terms, they became the third world. Okay. In fact, Japan, remember, developed long before it started developing in the late 1860s. And in fact, rather strikingly, at the time that Japan began its process of modernization and industrialization, they were roughly in the same stage of state formation, economic growth, and so on, as West Africa. It's been discussed by a number of African historians, correctly, I think. They were approximately in the same state. Well, Japan developed. West Africa became a monstrosity. Why? It was under colonial control, did not have sovereignty. There are many other such cases. Now, take, say, Egypt. If you go back to around the 1820s, Egypt was poised for economic development and industrialization, and it was, can't draw connections too closely, but it was roughly in the same state as the United States. It had a rich agriculture. That's why Napoleon conquered it. It had cotton, rich resources of cotton, which were very important then. It had a national government, Ahmad Ali's government, which was starting a program of modernization and industrialization, roughly at the same time the United States did. Well, the United States had sovereignty. England, Egypt didn't. In fact, the British made it very explicit in almost so many words that they were not going to permit a competitor in the Eastern Mediterranean. And the British and the French just crushed it. Okay, so Egypt is Egypt, and we're the United States. And there are many cases like that. You're right in saying that the specific mode of development was extremely ugly in many ways. But what was significant about it was that it did follow principles of economic sovereignty and independence, and controlling the means by which they could develop. Sometimes it's done badly, sometimes it's done well. But unless you have those options, you can't develop at all. And the economic principles we impose on others deny them those options, deny them sovereignty. Then in the case of Haiti, the one we're talking about, unless we can compel the imperial powers, the powerful states, to permit the kind of sovereignty that could develop out of their own lively, functioning civil society, they won't have a chance. I mean, if they have the chance, they may not use it well, but if they don't have the chance, they're obviously doomed.
Listening to your talking about the narrative of, historical narrative of Haiti, we see cultural and endemic and long-standing tribalism and racism. We see cultural, long-standing, endemic feudalism and gaps between rich and poor that are institutionalized. And now we deal with an overpowering media. Using Haiti as an example, what given those things, what can we do either individually or organizationally to have a significant impact in changing the direction of the narrative that previously has been based on these factors?
The racism is there and the cultural attitudes are there, and we know how to deal with them. We've dealt with plenty of them in the recent past. I mean, for example, racism is bad enough, but it's nothing like what it was 50 years ago in the United States. Or just maybe take the most dramatic change that's taken place in the United States and much of the world culturally in the last generation, namely women's rights. It's totally different from what it was 30 or 40 years ago. I mean, if I just think of, I'll just make it personal, if you had asked my grandmother whether she was oppressed, she wouldn't have known what you were talking about. That's just what women do. You know? If you'd asked my mother, she would have known, and she was very bitter about it, but she didn't do anything about it because that was out of the question. If you asked my daughters, they'd throw you out of the house. Okay, that's a change. And it's a change in cultural attitudes. And we know how it was done, and it's a major change. It's a significant one. But, you know, and the same has to be true about the other pathologies that we live with.
The question is, what is Haitian Popular Organization? Do you mean People's Organization? Or, you know, I don't know what is Popular Organization.
The people in Cité Soleil aren't there because they love to live in misery. I mean, there's a whole history that drove them there, parts of which I reviewed, and they'd be happy to get out of it and work hard to get out of it. As for the popular organizations, just look at what happened. I mean, just take, for example, that one dramatic moment, 1990, when popular organization in the slums in hideous conditions, in the rural areas where life is horrendous, but popular organization reached a point where they could do something that we can't dream of, namely enter an election, elect their own candidate with 2/3 of the vote. We can't do that. They did it. We can learn from them what popular organizations are.
Thank you very much. People, and they're going to take medicines to Haiti. We are giving Professor Chomsky a small gift from the Riverside Church. We had a little discussion. Do you believe in God? We said it's not important, because what we said here, we're giving him a gift that says, when you were born, God smiled. Yes. And we believe that. Thank you. Thank you.